And this episode might be one of the more recent ones that we have covered on Joko Yo because I didn't remember that it happened until I remembered that it happened. And I still don't believe that it happened because I didn't know that it happened the way it happened. But you're going to hear how it happened. Welcome to Joko Yo. Here it goes. On the morning of May 7, 2021, a Friday, an employee at Colonial Pipeline Company arrived at work and found a ransom note on a computer in the control room. As of this recording, that was 5 years ago. Just 5. By the afternoon, the company had shut down the entire pipeline. Now, all 5,500 miles of it from Houston, Texas to the port of New York and New Jersey, carrying 100 million gallons of gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and home heating oil every single day. The largest refined petroleum products pipeline in the entire United States. The one that supplies 45% of all fuel consumed on the entire East Coast was shut down because of a note on a computer, because of a password. One password belonged to one employee that had almost certainly been stolen and was sitting in a database on the dark web, and that someone in Eastern Europe had found and used to log into Colonial's virtual private network. The password had no multi-factor authentication protecting it. The account it belonged to was not even an active account. It was a legacy profile that someone had forgotten to disable. That is the thing that took down the gas line supply of the entire East Coast for 6 days in May of 2021. Now, you may remember that COVID was happening at the same time, but a forgotten password and an inactive account and a criminal gang in Russia that knew where to look for it. Where was it? In Selma, North Carolina, Johnston County. The Colonial Pipeline delivery facility at 2335 West Oak Street went quiet. The pipeline that runs from Greensboro south through Selma, the one they expanded in the 1960s along the same corridor Green's Path that established 300 years before, stopped moving fuel, and within 72 hours, the state of North Carolina had run almost completely dry. Now, to understand why a hack in a server room somewhere brought Johnston County to its knees and the entire East Coast, you need to understand what the Colonial Pipeline actually is and why it runs where it runs. The Colonial Pipeline was built in 1962 and completed in 1964. Its engineers were solving a specific problem. There were no oil refineries between Alabama and Pennsylvania. The refineries were on the Gulf Coast in Houston and New Orleans, and the population centers that need their product are in the southeast and the northeast. Somebody had built a pipe between them. Colonial's engineers followed the path of least resistance, which in North Carolina meant following the same flat coastal plain corridor that every traveler, every trader, and army has followed since the Tuscarora, and the animals before them and the people that in between walked it before the colonists arrived. Green's Path. 301 and 95. Same thing, man, that Green's Path. The Colonial Pipeline runs roughly parallel to all of them through Johnston County because Johnston County sits in the middle of the most logical route between the Gulf Coast and New York. The same geographic logic that made it the road that everything runs along for 3 centuries. By 1966, Colonial had expanded its system with a 16-inch lateral loop between Greensboro and Selma, specifically to increase capacity in this corridor. The Selma delivery facility, a permitted industrial operation at 2335 West Oak Street, became one of the distribution points where fuel coming up from the Gulf Coast could be tapped off and loaded onto the tanker trucks that supplied gas stations across eastern North Carolina and beyond. North Carolina has no oil refineries. It has no meaningful fuel storage of its own. The Colonial Pipeline carries approximately 75,000 or 75% of the state's liquid fuel. The product's SE pipeline carries another 20%. The remainder comes through the port of Wilmington. There is no backup. There is no redundancy. when Colonial stops, North Carolina stops, which is what happened on May 7 of 2021. The group that hacked the Colonial Pipeline called itself DarkSide. It operated out of Eastern Europe, almost certainly Russia, and ran what the cybersecurity industry calls a ransomware as a service model, meaning that it had built a sophisticated piece of malicious software and rented it out to criminal affiliates who used it to attack targets, split the proceeds with DarkSide, and move on to the next victim. DarkSide had been in operation since August of 2020. In the 9 months before the Colonial hack, it had stolen approximately $90 million from victims across 47 countries. It targeted deliberately and specifically companies running critical infrastructure, energy, water, healthcare, because those companies could not afford to be shut down and were therefore more likely to pay quickly. The FBI had been investigating DarkSide for months before May 2021. There were hundreds of active ransomware investigations running simultaneously. The DarkSide affiliate who attacked Colonial got into the network through a VPN, a virtual private network, the kind of remote access system that became ubiquitous during the COVID-19 pandemic when millions of workers started doing their jobs from home. The specific credential used belonged to an account that was no longer in active use, just sitting there. Somebody had simply failed to delete it. The password for that account, the one that opened the door to the largest fuel pipeline in the United States, had been found on the dark web, in one of the enormous databases of stolen credentials that criminal organizations love to compile and sell. Colonial Pipeline paid the ransom within hours of discovering the note, 75 Bitcoin, $4.4 million. The CEO later told Congress it was the right thing to do for the country. DarkSide provided a decryption tool. The tool was so slow that it was essentially useless. Colonial ended up restoring its systems from backup files instead. The pipeline came back online May 12, 5 days after it went down. 1 month later, the FBI traced the Bitcoin through the blockchain, the public ledger that records every cryptocurrency transaction, and seized 63 of the 75 Bitcoin from a wallet DarkSide had used. By then, Bitcoin's value had crashed. The 63 coins were worth about $2.3 million. Colonial had paid $4.4. The government got back about half from a currency that had lost half its value. The math was not flattering to anyone involved except for DarkSide. DarkSide, meanwhile, went offline, not because it was caught, but because the intention was bad for business. It reappeared under a different name later. The people who ran it were never prosecuted. Russia denied every involvement and every responsibility. Vladimir Putin called the accusations nonsense. Now, the news of the Colonial hack broke on Saturday, May 8th. By Sunday, people across the Southeast were already lining up at gas stations. By Monday, the panic was general. In the Raleigh-Durham area, which is also us, 72% of gas stations reported they had no fuel by midweek. I remembered this. Y'all remember that? Across North Carolina, the figure peaked at 75%. School districts started stockpiling fuel for their bus fleets. Man, it not only did that happen, I remember it, but it brings back memories of being a kid in a car in the 70s waiting for gas. American Airlines rerouted flights through Dallas to avoid having to refuel in Charlotte. The port of Wilmington had enough space for 2 barges, and the line of fuel trucks waiting to load from them stretched down the dock. Trains hauled tankers inland. None of it was enough or fast enough. In Knightdale, again, right across the county line, 2 people were arrested on assault charges after fighting and spitting in each other's faces over their places in line at a Marathon gas station on Tuesday afternoon. 2 people physically fighting in public over a spot in a gas line. Wow. The price gouging hotline set up by the North Carolina Attorney General received 622 calls in the first few days. Stations that had Fuel were charging $3, $4, $5 a gallon. This is 2021 when the pre-shortage average was around $2.80. People were filling gas cans, plastic bags, open buckets. The Consumer Product Safety Commission issued an actual public safety warning asking people to please not fill plastic bags with gasoline, which should not have needed to be said, but apparently it did. The AAA spokesman, Tiffany Wright, put it with perfect Southern understatement. We are so often our own worst enemy when it comes to these things. The bread and milk before a storm, the toilet paper at the start of a pandemic. It's a knee-jerk reaction. We go and we panic and we overconsume, and she's right. The experts agreed. There was no actual fuel shortage at the refinery level. The gasoline existed. It just couldn't move. The pipe was stopped. And because there was no backup, no redundancy, no plan for a week without the pipe, 72 hours of panic buying did the rest. The pipeline came back online on May 12th, and within a few days the stations had fuel again. The lines disappeared. The price gouging calls to the Attorney General's office slowed down. Knightdale settled back to being Knightdale. Johnston County went back to its ordinary business, and the particular quiet of a county that has always been on the road that things seem to pass through on their way somewhere else. But the North Carolina Senate Agricultural Committee had held a hearing the following week, and what they heard was sobering. The Colonial Pipeline carries 75% of North Carolina's liquid fuel. The state has no refineries. All of our backup systems can supply maybe a fraction of normal demand in an emergency. North Carolina is, in the language of infrastructure planning, critically dependent on one single point of failure, and that point of failure this time was Selma, North Carolina. Duke Energy's senior vice president told the committee some additional interstate pipeline supply would be a very good resiliency opportunity. What he meant was, if this happens again, we have no plan. The vulnerability that dark side exploited was not in a technical one, it was a human one, a forgotten account, an undeleted password. An employee VPN profile that no one had cleaned up when the employee left or changed roles, the most sophisticated pipeline infrastructure in the entire American Southeast, the one that traces its route through Johnston County along the same corridor as Green's Path, the one that carries enough fuel every day to fill more than 1 million car tanks, the one that supplies jet fuel to Charlotte Douglas International and gasoline at 12,000 stations and diesel to the trucks that move everything, all was accessible to a criminal gang in Russia through a door that somebody had forgotten to close. Now, in October of 1775, when Johnston County's courthouse hosted the first meeting of the revolutionary government of North Carolina, the thing the founding generation was trying to build was a state that would not be held hostage from a distance by a power that did not answer to its people. They were thinking about a king in London. They could not have imagined that a criminal enterprise in St. Petersburg would have the same situation. But the problem, distance, dependence, a single point of control over something essential, it's the same problem. It's always been the same problem. The Selma delivery facility on West Oak Street is still there. The pipeline's still running. The fuel's still moving through Johnston County on its way north on the road that's always been the road that everything runs along. The password's been changed, the account's been deleted. For now, that appears to be enough, but for a few days, a forgotten password of a forgotten account in Selma, North Carolina, shut down our oil and gas on the entire East Coast. That's insane. And y'all, that's Joko Yo. Y'all be good.